Hi, I'm Professor Eric Avila, and this summer I'll teach History 142D, or American Cultural History. This short introduction is meant to give you a sense of what this course is about. Let's begin with a simplified definition of the word culture. What is culture? We'll spend some time talking about this on the first day of class, but for this brief introduction, I'll define culture as simply a form of human expression or a story that people in all times, in all places, create to give meaning to themselves and their world. These stories can take shape through written and spoken language, or through images like films and photographs, or through songs, dance, art, magazines, advertising, comic books, video games, sports, recreation, leisure, and many other forms of cultural expression and experience. Sometimes these stories are created by individuals, for individuals, within very localized contexts. But in our society, stories are usually created by vast corporations who advertise and market their stories as products for sale to a mass audience. American culture includes the history of American literature, stories in the most obvious sense, whether the novels, poems, and short stories of Edgar Allan Poe, a central figure in the Romantic period of 19th century America, or the literary works of Alice Walker, a late 20th century writer who brought a Black feminist perspective into the canon of American literature. It also includes film, perhaps the best known and most loved artifact of American culture, which tells many stories, but only recently from the perspective of women and people of color. Art, whether painting or photography, is a major aspect of American culture and American cultural history. When American cities matured in the mid-20th century, artists like Edward Hopper depicted the uniquely American character of urban life, while in the 1980s, photographers like Cindy Sherman took self-portraits to depict the multiple meanings of what it meant to be a woman in the age of feminism. American cultural history also includes the history of musical production and experience, from the founding of the New York Philharmonic in 1842, which brought European traditions of classical music to the United States, to the performances and recordings of James Brown, a pioneer of soul and funk music, whose music gave rise to disco, hip-hop, and rap. While classical music was patronized by elite segments of American society, the music of James Brown put Black cultural expression at the center of late 20th century America. These are just a few examples of the kind of material that we'll survey in this class. Ultimately, however, we'll emphasize the historical relationship between culture and power in the United States, exploring the many avenues through which power, political and economic power, flows through cultural expression and production. Think about race, for example, the way that people of color have been represented in American culture versus how they have been able to represent themselves. What do these images do? How do they confirm or undermine popular assumptions and stereotypes? Who is able to create their own self-image and who is not? And what factors determine that ability? If we talk about race, then we also have to talk about class and class conflict in American culture. How have elites in American history pooled their resources to create exclusive and expensive universities, museums, and libraries? Whose interests did that serve? On the other hand, how did working class Americans form their own cultural realm to escape the grind of factory work and create bonds with other people in their shoes? And of course, gender as well. How much power have women had historically to represent themselves, their hopes, their dreams, their fears and desires in American culture, and how much has their image been dictated by the intentions and desires of men? These are critical questions that we'll ask together as a class in our survey of American cultural history since 1865. So join me and study the diverse voices of American history and how they found powerful and popular forms of expression in the words, images, and sounds of American cultural history.